Charleston, his history has been shaped by many forces over the past 3.5 centuries, and certainly one of them has been the city's ability to rise from the ashes of many catastrophes. Our friend Leigh Handal is back for our I Love the Lowcountry feature. And Leigh, this is the anniversary, right, of one of Charleston's biggest fire, if not the biggest, right?
It's not quite the biggest,
close.
but it certainly was the biggest of its day, and that is tomorrow, June 13th, will mark, let me do some quick math, 219th anniversary of the Great Fire of 1796. There are actually two fires that year, but the one that began on June 13th smoldered. It started at 3 o'clock that afternoon, a lodge alley, which you may have seen that right off Meeting Street. The wind was blowing from West Ashley, and it blew the fire over toward East Bay Street.
Wow, and I know we have a map, a really cool map that we want to pull up, and you can show us, exactly where it was. It might be hard to see on your TV screen.
Yeah, and this is the Halsey Map, and it shows a part of where that fire burned. You see where the square is?
Yes.
That is where today we call the Four Corners of Law. At the time, and City Hall was there now, but at the time it was the beef market, and so it was a big commercial area. And so if you look down a block, you see the kind of L-shaped building down there. That's important. That's the City Tavern. Now the reason that's important,
that's always important, Leigh.
It's very important. And in this case, the connection is that for the first 100 and so years of Charleston's existence, City Council did not meet in a city hall. They met in the tavern.
That's so funny.
And so both the tavern,
I'm sure they got a lot accomplished. A few hours in.
And the beef market burned. And of course, this is City Hall today. It was built as a bank in 1800, 4 years after that fire. And the bank left after about a decade, so around 1811 it became Charleston's first city hall. But had the beef market not burned, we probably would not have City Hall where we see it today.
That's so interesting. So the fire started, I imagine very quickly back then it spread and did a lot of damage because we didn't have the capacity.
There's no real given reason for the fire. It could have been any kind of kitchen accident or whatever. But it burned out 250 properties, both residential and commercial, and displaced about 300 families.
How long did it go before they could actually contain it?
Well, it started at 3 on the 13th and burned until dawn of the next morning. So most of a day.
That's a long time.
It is, and did a lot of damage.
Okay, so we talked about the City Hall that was destroyed, and then it continued to burn towards East Bay, correct?
It did.
And what else did it hit?
Well, as it burned, it's interesting. There are another two buildings that have an interesting story. The fire brigades of the time tried to stop the fire by going ahead and pulling down some buildings, and they did that to the French Huguenot Church, where it stands on Church Street now. That's the second French Huguenot Church. The first church they pulled down quickly to try to make a gap so the fire couldn't go. And this is the French Huguenot Church today.
So when you say they pulled it down, they literally...
They kind of blew it up. They just blew it up, and that created a gap. You still fight forest fires that way today. But here's the kicker. St. Philip's Church, which is just a block up from French Huguenot Church, there was a slave who was on a boat in the harbor, and he saw the sparks start to light St. Philip's Church. This was the second St. Philip's. He belonged to a man named Charles Lenning, and so presumably he attended church with his master. Lenning was on the vestry there. He came into town as he watched the fire burn, somehow miraculously climbed up on the roof of St. Philip's, and as the embers sparked over, he was pulling the wooden shingles off the roof and tossing them down, and he saved St. Philip's Church, which prevented the fire to spreading to the French Huguenot Church, had the French Huguenot Church not just been exploded.
So he was on top of St. Philip's, ripping off wooden shingles.
Yeah, it's a miracle. And 2 months later, on August 14th, the vestry of St. Philip's bought his freedom, $707.14 from Mr. Lenning, and gave him subsistence, food and board for life in appreciation for his saving.
I wonder if there's any family history. Do you know if he still has relatives in town? I mean, that's such a...
I don't know, but Lenning, of course, is a Charleston name.
It is,
So if your name is Lenning, it's
that could have been your
worth looking into.
Cool.
worth looking into.
So how long did it take after this? 300 people displaced, 200 properties. How long was the recovery effort?
Oh, it took a while. It's interesting now. Charleston's always been a very benevolent city, and they had a charity relief fund, and everybody pitched in to help those. But I found one quote I wanted to share by a gentleman whose name truly was Alexander. I don't make this stuff up.
Mom and Dad were in the Tavern when they named him.
That's right. They
Sounds good.
Alexander. He was a school teacher on Union Street, which is now State Street. And apparently he got some help from some neighbors too, but a few days after the fire on June 16th, he ran an ad in the City Gazette, and that ad, he thanked his friends for helping. So he thanked his numerous friends for their strenuous, though unsuccessful exertions to preserve his house and school in the late fire, as well as for their more fortunate endeavors to save his furniture and effects, several of which have not yet been returned, he supposes, for want of knowing the place of his present residence, which is at Mr. Vale's in Ginyard Street. Most of his wearing apparel and several other articles are still missing.
That's funny. So he was very kind to them, while also maybe accusing them.
That's right. That's right. So they pitched in to help, but you don't want to paint it with too pretty a picture.
Yeah. And this is such a tale. I remember when I first moved to Charleston, took the carriage tour, right?
Sure.
This was one of the big stories of it, and it's something that our children learn.
Well, Charleston itself has been shaped by so many of the major fires. I noted that just a month before this fire in June, there had been another fire just to the north of it that burned 65 houses. But of course, this second fire was so big, it kind of pushed the first fire to the back burner to make a bad burn.
Not as hot. Not as hot a topic anymore.
That's right. But the largest fire was in 1861, and it began on the eastern side of the city, and it burned all the way through town to the western side. And if you go to the website of Historic Charleston Foundation, they have this fabulous interactive map, and it will show you how the fire of 1796, the fire of 1740, the Great Fire of 1838, which took out Ansonborough, and then that major 1861 fire, the paths that they took. And that helps you understand how the city developed. And that's why all the great not all, but a lot of great antebellum mansions are in Ansonborough, because they were built right after that 1838 fire.
Leigh Handal, always a pleasure.
Always a
pleasure. What are we
to
going to talk about
here.
next time?
I think next time we're going to talk about Carolina Day.
Ooh.
Big anniversary coming up later this month, and so we'll talk about blowing the pants off Peter Parker.
We love it. I love the Lowcountry. Blowing the pants off Peter Parker. Tune in next time.
I can't miss it.
Yeah, and right after this, we've got Kay Hyman on the way to the studio with an I Am Caitlin update. That's next. Stay with us.
That's great.